In late April of 1937, a Ute Indian by the name of John Walker says that he encountered a night monster spider that spoke and warned against entropy while it wound its claws around him. According to the Sioux Nations, a skinwalker can act as a bear, a wolf, or a coyote, even a fleshwalker, or a moon-illuminated skinwalker, a subcult of skinwalkers. There have been reports of many moon natives. Commonly, the Sioux and the Ute refer to these humanoid spider-like beings with multiple arms and distorted faces with large fangs. While not necessarily resembling that of a spider, half man, half spider like you would think from the name, it's actually been called a night spider for many who have seen it. Many believe, like skinwalkers, that these are actually a derivative of skinwalkers or shapeshifters, originating of the practice of shapeshifting and dark magic. While rarely talked about, there are several reports of seeing these strange arachnid-like cryptids for years and years, often much more rare than people would like to talk about. These have been known to be spotted by a well-known explorer of cryptids, Richard Freeman, more often than not in obscure and deserted areas all throughout the country. Although it is doubtful they can be caught, as they quickly dart back into the night after fleeing from an encounter. I can't be certain as to what tribes and cultures of natives have their own experiences with these beings, like they do with Bigfoot and dogman. Again, I'll state that these beings are dangerous in their own right, but I believe they are a sect of skinwalkers that use their dark magic to contort their bodies to evil-looking things. During the days of the Blackfeet and Sioux Wars, a Sioux Indian by the name of Little Coyote claims he was sucked up into the sky by the spirit of a skinwalker. He claims he was sucked up into the sky and somehow ended up in a dark cavern, is how he described it. Surrounding him in the cavern were these night spider creatures, what he described as half man, half beast, with multiple arms, black hair, and huge fangs all over their face. Terrified, he managed to break free of the trap. The question remains is that he was sucked up into the sky, but yet somehow pulled underground. Is it possible that he was abducted and then, while unconscious, placed underground? We don't know. Although there have been sightings of cryptids, night spiders aren't talked about all that much. Not as much as you would think. This was years ago, and I'm still terrified by what I experienced this night. This was from another world, and I've heard of skinwalkers, and seen this coyote thing come onto our field multiple times, but never did I imagine I would encounter anything like what we saw, like what my brother-in-law would refer to as something called a night spider. Before I get more into that, there would be mornings where I would see this tall, upright walking coyote thing kind of just hanging around our field, like it was always waiting and watching for the next opportunity to do something. It was incredibly unnerving. It would always just be crouching down in the tall grass and watching. There had been a couple of times it tried to make moves on some of our small dogs and livestock, and it did. They'd go missing. Our entire chicken coop was taken, along with all the chickens in it. It was a small coop and not wired into the ground. Anyway, one morning, I look off to the left into the field. I don't see anything. I look to the right into the field, and I see this skinwalker creature that's staring back at me. Off in the distance, I see it almost every couple of mornings. It's out there and I want nothing to do with it. The same thing happens to my brother-in-law. He's very devout in the Navajo way, and he doesn't believe in what we call skinwalkers. It's like he's forced himself to confront this thing. One morning, he's out there in the field and this skinwalker, faceless, sneaks up from behind him, real close. How did it know my brother-in-law was Navajo? How does it know he's a spiritual man? It's like it puts thoughts in the mind and does what it wants. He wasn't saying that, of course, but it's just a powerful energy. It was about as hideous as you can imagine it being. It grabs hold of my brother, and he's screaming prayers in Navajo, and this thing takes complete hold of him, dragging him back while subduing him. After it gets to about the edge of the field and lets go of him, it flees off, continuing to pray and shout. I'm not sure what my brother-in-law said, but it must have worked. The Skinwalker had let go of him and fled off into the woods nearby. Right after he was freed, he's going crazy, telling me to never encounter it, never go looking for it. Although I don't go looking for it, at least I do my best not to. I try and keep my distance from these things, if you understand. Being a traditional Navajo has a purpose, but a lot of Christian religions are more open. Part of me understands because it's validation for a lot of Navajo way practitioners to accept. That's there I mean. There would be a lot of people not believing without visual proof. You know what I mean? Like, when I first saw it in the morning, I would tell my father-in-law and my wife's father what I saw. They'd say that I saw it 2 days prior in the same spot. As it started getting closer, I'd tell a friend, and he'd say how he saw it 2 days again. Some people aren't really into that, or understanding the Navajo way. So, I respect that everybody has to make it their own mind. Now, the following couple of nights, this thing comes back, but it's much scarier than before. The first few times that we'd all seen it, it tried taking my brother-in-law, and it was in its coyote form. I say coyote form because that's the only way I can accurately depict what this thing looked like. When it came back the following night, or a few nights later, it looked something akin to that of a night spider. If you don't know, night spiders are a branch of shapeshifters under the Skinwalker umbrella, and they specialize shapeshifting into these abominable beings. Instead of wearing animal skins like traditional skinwalkers, they use their dark magic to contort and turn into these hideous beings. They usually have multiple arms and large claws on each hand, deep sunken in black eyes, large black fangs protruding from their chest and mouth. They crawl more on their fours than they do walk around upright. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of these cryptids, but that's what I've heard them referred to as by many of the natives. I had no idea they were even a thing until I saw one with my own eyes the following night, as I'm about to discuss. So, I'm outside at night, pondering the day, having a small glass of whiskey that I just poured myself. I hadn't even taken into consideration that, well, I'd only had maybe 1 or 2 sips off the glass at the time, and I see this thing approaching from the field. The same spot where this creature disappeared the day before with my brother-in-law. I immediately knew it was this creature, but I did not recognize the form it was in. I just knew deep down it wasn't a good thing. As it came closer, even with how much light there was that night, I saw enough to horrify me. Immediately after its appearance, I went inside and woke up my wife. She had this big comforter over her, so I couldn't exactly see her face. I asked her about it first, and she's like, "No, there's nothing. You've just been drinking. It's the shadows." But I pushed that aside and wanted to make sure that she saw it too. I wanted assurance that I was not crazy, but she refused to budge, so I'm like, okay, screw it. And I go grab my 44 out of the closet, step back onto the porch, and in that moment, I nearly soiled my britches right there. 10 feet away from the porch, this thing is just standing there, like it was standing its ground on a contested territory. I got a good look at this thing. It looked like it came from the pits of hell itself. It was maybe slightly more taller than 6 feet, and it looked exactly like the night spider that I had mentioned. It was challenging me, and so I slowly pulled out my 44 and aimed it right at the center of this thing. I felt like I couldn't pull the trigger, like this thing was controlling my body. I felt myself tense up and had this paralysis coming over me, shooting through my body. This creature slowly smirks at me. I felt like I couldn't pull the trigger, like this thing was controlling my body. I felt myself tense up and had this paralysis feeling shooting all throughout my body. This creature smirks at me slowly, and I felt myself losing total control of my body. My hand, with the finger still on the trigger, starts to turn my .44 inwards towards my chest. I'm frozen and can't fight off what is going on with my body, as this thing is practically controlling my own muscles. Just as I am putting the .44 right against my own chest, against my will, the loudest gunshot I'd ever heard goes off, and this thing gets shot right in the chest from behind and lets out a horrible scream, like you wouldn't believe. Instantly, I feel my muscles relax and I drop my .44. This thing starts screaming radically and begins running off into the night as my brother-in-law came to me. He felt something was wrong and came just in the nick of time, like some sort of crazy sixth sense or something. He had shot this thing nearly point blank right in the back, comes rushing over to me to make sure I'm okay. Let me just say that as I'm recalling these events, I'm trying to do my best not to make it sound like some crazy fake story. I want to express it in a way that it's terrifying but also does the story justice. And this thing was somehow nearly getting me to kill myself via mind control or something. This is where my brother-in-law, who, by the way, like I stated, is full Navajo, and told me about night spiders, what they are and how they have this horrible ability to take possession of anybody they target, to make them do their evil bidding. He much refers to them as physical demons that have a form and shape. Anyway, there's not much else to add, but I wanted to say this before I had never ever really heard of a night spider before. Whether it's that of a skinwalker or whatever, they're extremely dangerous beings that should be kept at a distance at all times as best as you can. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. I'm sure I've missed some details here along the way. I have a friend that I've known for years. He is both Native American and an avid hunter and outdoorsman. He has experienced his share of strange things happening to him, but they do not fit entirely with a lot of the stories told of true skinwalkers. However, one particular time, I was shown some odd things that he said followed a strange encounter. He goes on some pretty strange country with very steep and rugged inclines. Elevation around 7,600 feet. One time, it was following a summer butchering, and he was down in Apache country, which is just below the Mogollon Rim. He was tracking a wounded deer that jumped into some dense brush, and after a couple of hours, he reaches the top of the catchment basin many hours later, after running and tracking. He then comes across a small cave with lots of old potsherds, which he examined at length to determine the condition they were in. Then he found some clay-like images that had seemingly been made either by pressing the trenching into the ground or by applying water. He told me that the more he left them alone, the better they would get, so he would like to go back there at night. Unfortunately, he's not been able to go back. I promised him I would not divulge into any of these secrets of his, and to the best of my ability as an investigator and explorer of these phenomena, that is my promise to him. He has also had some other very strange happenings around the local environment. Usually, buffalo will trample along with the deer, and he said that only a few times did he actually catch either a creature or see its image not fully formed or a fleeting shadow. It is all very difficult when he tells me this to comprehend, but reality is, he is telling them the same as I'm about to tell you. The most horrible sighting he had was when he was walking about at nighttime, and claims he saw a creature unlike anything he's ever seen before. He described it as to have several arms with large black claw appendages, large black tusks on its face and its chest, ink black eyes, and covered in long hair. It moved at an extraordinary rate of speed, and to be honest, he isn't sure what he saw. I mean, at all. It was like a mixture of both human and animal. Not like the whole werewolf thing, but this thing had appendages and tusks and eyes. Not quite humanoid, but not quite werewolf-like either. It looked different. It had long appendages and huge black claws. It was chasing him while he was in his truck. He said that it kind of reminded him of a large spider, but it was also like that of a man, with the way it ran, and it had this horrendous scream. After it lapped him entirely, it quit screaming, and he said he could just hear its movements in the brush on the side of the road as it was trailing away from him. He turned on the road, drove off, and he tells me he has never been so scared. I asked many questions of him because this whole thing just didn't make sense to me. I have since, over the course of about 2 to 3 hours conversing with him, seen him turn ashen white over his recollection of this event, and he said that this particular one was the creepiest thing he has ever experienced. He goes deep into Native American stories and how this figure is known as a skinwalker, or so he believes, and that this particular one is a very, very dark and powerful one, and there actually used to be a sect of them that guarded Indian villages. He also told me that what he thought that night was not a traditional skinwalker, but a witch who is far more powerful. When talking to me, he used the actual word his tribe calls them, and out of respect, I won't use the word, so I'll just say skinwalker. He said these beings were something else altogether, and they were not just skinwalkers. He also chased by something just the other night, what he believes to be the same creature. It could be another kind of spirit that was chasing him, but before I relay the story, I'll let him tell it from his perspective. He tells me this, and I quote, "I was walking through the Native American res grounds and mountains and heard what sounded like a loose metal sheet. A big Ford dump truck on a dirt road can do this with the right gravel. So I stopped to listen for it. I couldn't hear anything for a bit as my heart seemed to want to rather speed up or implode. Something cool was blowing past my legs, and I stood still, trying to sort this out. After a minute, I walked with the current, and I slowly began to hear the metal noise. I realized that I was not near any of the roads in my area, just meadows. I hear something large running towards me, and when I shone my light, I saw it was the exact same creature as the night that it chased my truck. I turned and ran. It ran away, though, rather than give chase. I have been having thoughts of it over and over as I recall this experience, almost obsessively. Then, he tells me more that, interestingly enough, this is not the only encounter he has experienced around this area, and he has told me of a time that he was very young. He had gone to go hunting with his uncle, had come across a large buck. He was in a tree and his uncle was on the ground. His uncle and him were talking, and the buck made the same grunt as his uncle made. These skinwalkers are said to be very smart. They know things. They imitate sounds and people and see into the minds of people. His uncle drew his attention to this thing, and it began shapeshifting right in front of them into this large, beastly man covered in animal skins, and begins levitating. This person or being levitated away, like it just went up in the sky. Very slowly, but they never saw where it landed. He never heard anything from this at all, and it all happened so quickly. This is just a small list of all the things he's gone through. I'll see if maybe I can have him reach out to you, personally, and you can email him, or even interview him. Okay, so a few months ago, we were coming home from taking a friend to Phoenix. It was probably 12:30, 1 in the morning. I turned off on a road we usually take around to see if anything was around. We get to a waypoint that we usually use as a turnaround point. We shoot handguns out there all the time. 22s, typical plinking things that we do. You point the guns down a range, they shoot, you shoot them off, whatever, that's it. So, we got out to this point already with a friend that stays at another ranch with us. And it's about a half mile to about 1 mile into an area. This is where we go all the time. It's pretty safe. It's another friend's property, actually, and we've never had any issues. There's also a lot of old ATV trails all around the area. Before we set anything up for night shooting, we start hearing these creepy sounds off in the dark. Now, me and my brother are both shining our lights around asking, "Did you hear that? Am I just hearing things? What is that?" This wasn't normal stuff here. We've heard things in the night like coyotes and just strange noises, but this was something else entirely. Like clicking noises and just strange sounds. So, desperately, we start looking around and try to identify the source of these strange and bizarre noises. When my brother, I hear him start cussing and running back to the truck. I turn to look and I see this thing running at him. Creeped out is a huge understatement here. Whatever this was had multiple long limbs and had these massive pincer-like things on its face and large black eyes. It was running full force. I took a couple of shots at it myself. We get back in the truck, make it a couple miles down the road, hauling butt, and were stopped by a cop who showed up because he was convinced we were shooting off into people's property. Our plans here were to go and have fun plinking, so we had to be careful not to tell the officer that we had seen this creature. He would have thought we were on drugs or something. We didn't just shoot out illegally, and he kept trying to make that the issue. So we got into a little bit of a gun argument, which here in Arizona, I don't know, it's not California-like, that you can do this and you can't do that. We're not saying that this is all. We all know the laws are just as is. Firearms can be very touchy here. They don't include recreational shooting, which we have a lot of out here, a lot of hunting. It creates issues apparently, and we held back from saying anything about the encounter with the cop. I mean, that's the thing. How do you prove a skinwalker? What I believe we encountered that night, how do you prove they exist? How do you prove that we were a bunch of people who go to shoot and enjoy this stuff for fun without looking like we were out to cause mischief? Again, I assume it was a skinwalker and not something else. But I don't know. I'm speaking from ignorance. You're the so-called expert here, so maybe you could help. My parents always owned a bunch of land, and they have roughly 100 acres. They only ever used a couple for their own horses and for everything. There's this one part on the tree line that we've been seeing a lot of evidence of some sort of animal in our backyard. Like, whatever my grandpa goes to take care of it, it just disappears into the woods and can't be seen from our backyard. We've tried to relax about it and began hunting, but without any luck. It was just doing some stalker stuff like in the movies. So, I got told a couple of weeks ago that this creature has killed my gang's cow. This thing, whatever it is, ate all the guts and whatever that was inside the cow, leaving the body to kind of dry up. But the calf was still perfectly intact, just dead. The chickens will even try to chase it away, I guess, if it gets too close to our house. I guess that's why the coop and everything about them is gone. I know for a fact it hides in the woods. I know it does. Whenever the dog looked away, we could see it stand up and stay, even though before that it could not be seen, and when it did, it would run. It's looking more and more like a skinwalker every day. I've read enough stories online to see that many people deal with things like this on a daily basis. I think that's what I'm dealing with. Our livestock, when we put them out, they start acting super timid and scared. We know this thing is around. There's no denying that. We proceed to hear these weird screeches and growls all throughout the hours of the night. And when it does, the glowing yellow eyes never fail to accompany them, and livestock always go missing after. We're scared. Help me. We had been driving for hours, holding up against the late-night traffic for close to an hour and a half. It felt like rush hour, and the miles melted under us in a slow motion, as if we were traveling through a dimension where time and space was distorted, and the speed of light was no longer a constant. At the same time, that same car that had been tailgating us pulled up alongside. At first, I was awestruck by the fact that there seemed to be something wrong with the driver as they zoomed past by, but I didn't think much about it. Once we made it out of the city, the fog around us seemed to clear up a bit, but only for a brief few moments. From the distance, I see some lights flashing. We keep driving, but at a slower pace out of caution. I was hesitant to pull over when I see this large, what I can only describe, now hear me out, as a demon come barreling towards my car from the darkness. It was this 8-9 foot tall monster, piercing dark eyes, razor claws, and skin that was gross looking, like it was dark and leathery, and it had large pincher-like fangs from its face, jet black eyes, and it even appeared to have multiple arms all down its back. It came rushing at my car head first, and I had to swerve out of the way just enough in time to ensure I did not crash around another driver in the oncoming lane. I have no idea what I just witnessed, but I now know that this was no person in a costume, it wasn't some escaped gorilla, it wasn't anybody or any animal I had ever seen or known about. I should have called the cops. I didn't. I just sat at the side of the road, trying to process what just happened. What did I saw? As this is going on, I see it again in my rearview mirror. This time, further down the road out of the fog. It was coming in my direction, chasing my vehicle. It was too close to make me feel anywhat comfortable, so I quickly pulled up out of that spot and I started driving at breakneck, very illegal speeds to try and get away from whatever this being was. Look, I'm sorry I'm terrible at writing my own story down, but that's the basic premise of what happened. It was a chilly, foggy evening here in southwest Washington. I often took my children out biking here in the evenings to get a quick bit of exercise before they settled down for the night. I wasn't looking forward to this run for the usual reasons. Not only were there no close bike paths, but the air today was chilly, and the fog had been pretty thick for most of the day. It was enough to disrupt visibility, not just of the nearby branches and shrubs, but even other people. I didn't like that. As a parent, I preferred clear and total visibility. There was always a reason to be a little concerned, but this evening, something felt different. Something was off. We were out for maybe a half hour when my daughter, angry at her sibling, lashed out and punched him. They had been fighting all evening up until this point, and I had just about had enough. Angrily, telling them enough, we turned around and headed back as punishment. The only thing left to do was now set our sights towards home. I turned and took lead, and a look of shock was on my face. I tried my best to focus on the darker part of the path, and I found myself looking at what I can only decipher as one thing: a single roadside reflector. The low light caused it to kind of stand out on the side of the empty blacktop road. As I'm looking up and just kind of taking in my surroundings of the ever-dimming light, I see movement off in the brush next to me. A creature gazed back at me, tall, hunched over, with multiple legs, and these large, bulbous black eyes staring at me. We all pedaled as fast as we could down the road. I told my son to pick up the bike, and we hightailed it out of there soon after. He didn't speak for long, and only when I asked him if he saw anything like Mommy did. His big poor eyes told me everything I needed to know. He saw it too, and pointed down the road, saying it was that thing just down there that he saw, and it looked like a spider monster, is what he said. I have to assume that this was our warning. I don't know why it's so hard for me to trust my gut instinct in retrospect. In any case, I wasn't proud. I'm sorry if this seems frazzled and all over the place, but we don't bike in this area anymore, ever after this incident. And to date, I have no idea what we saw. I was outside with a group of friends on vacation in Maryland. At the time, I was a Marine sergeant stationed in Germany. We had spent the day outdoors burning stuff we didn't want, and At about 2200 hours, we had decided to go to our cabin. It was on a mountain about 5 miles west outside of Cumberland. At the time, our memory was that we started to hear some popping that sounded like light firecrackers around 2300 hours. I had a counter with me, and I heard no clicks, and so I didn't think much of it. From the beginning, we heard this noise and it sounded like a herd of goats running. It started getting closer and closer, and many of us were kind of like, what? And we get to the top of this hill, and we're doing some night hiking, just for fun and giggles. We had flashlights, and of course, we're all very curious to find out exactly what we were hearing. We had been hearing strange noises, and so we shined the light in the direction of the noise. And lo and behold, this thing lit up. All of us gasped, including I. This being what is now fully illuminated by our lights was unlike anything you could think or see in a movie. It was clung to a tree like some sort of tree spider or something, but also looked very human. It had dark, dead, leathery-looking skin, several arms that clung to the tree, and these massive black claws in each of its hands. That's how it clung on so well. The face was smaller, but had these giant inward fangs. They reminded me of giant teeth that were black. As soon as I shined my light on, I just knew that what we were dealing with in the moment, in my time, wasn't human at all. This was something very different altogether, and I'm ashamed to admit that even me, with military experience, fled in fear of this thing as we all did. We all went running for fear of this creature coming after us. As I was running, I was slipping and I fell. I looked up and the thing lunged at me, but barely missing me thanks to some thicker brush near right where I fell. I quickly was able to pull myself up, but I knew I didn't have a lot of time to separate myself from this thing. We managed to escape its grasp and lost it after we ran a bit further. All of us terrified and out of breath and unsure of what we had just encountered. For the longest time, I thought it was an alien. I mean, I've never heard or known of a creature like this in my life. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't know what we had encountered. And it wasn't until years ago when I found out the definition. It was something called a night spider, I guess. I learned it from an old native shaman when I arrived back in Germany. I'm glad to know that this is now becoming a known occurrence of what this thing probably is, although I've never heard anybody else ever talk about this creature. A lot of people think that this specific account is fake, as seeing as sightings like this can be rare. I wanted to come out years ago with this, but I never had solid investigative case to back me up. The case and evidence was for all of you that want the truth. I know this is real. I have no reason to make this up. Please make my details anonymous. Thank you, what lurks beneath. I was in my 20s. My fiancé and I had set up a small camp set up just off the main campsite, up here in the beautiful Ozarks. The camp area included a few trees and had stone fire rings around these nice, intricate fire pits. We had been there for about a week with some friends and their kids, enjoying an uber-long camping trip. The kids had been playing in the back of our camp area and had ran up to the front of the camp. All of a sudden, the kids began yelling. The friend that was with them said that they all ran up the hill and hid underneath a picnic table. He said that he grabbed his children and ran up to the main campsite. They were all scared and shouting about something big coming after them. We thought they were playing around and didn't think much of it. My fiancé and I were out by the campfire when this happened. I was working on a wood carving, and she was sitting beside me. I had looked up, and she just had this strange look on her face. She said she wanted to show me something. She had been meaning to talk to it about me now for some time. I was like, okay. And so she brought me back to a tree that was about 20 or so feet out, the furthest spot around our tent and camping area. She pointed to a spot far out in a rather medium-sized field just a short distance away. She points to this lone fir tree in this small meadow. She says that she saw a
strange creature observing her a few nights prior at that distance. She had a double take because of what it looked like, she said. I wasn't sure what she was getting at, but as she was describing it to me, she says that she believes the kids had seen it too. She said it was standing on two legs and was huge, that it had multiple arms and huge claws and these giant fangs, almost like an upright spider or something, she described it. She says that it was up and close to the tree, and its eyes were glowing. She says it was most likely bald, but had small specks of hair the lower you went down onto this thing. It was kind of hanging onto the tree, and it was standing next to it like it had just come down from it. So, we walked back towards the fire, talking about what she had seen off and far in the distance. I hear this ear-piercing scream, unlike anything I've ever heard before. Call it cliche or what, but the way my wife reacted to her showing me what she saw was alarming. Then, I hear this. It didn't sound like it was from a known animal that I have ever heard. That's what's creepy, is we all heard that scream come from the same direction that my wife saw the thing in the small meadow, staring at her just a couple of nights before. Just further off into the woods, shortly after, we heard that and sat back down by the fire. The kids come running back up, all pale as a sheet of paper, saying they saw a monster on the way back from hiking, out in the woods near close by. They were all scared and went on to describe what they saw in vivid detail, matching exactly what my wife had just told me prior to these kids coming back. To make a long story short, after that happened, I had to get everybody settled down and calm. We never did hear anything like that again high up in the mountains that night. There was a lot of commotion with the kids being scared of what if, and if this thing might come back, but we never heard any more noises. We stayed up late around the campfire after everybody went up to their camping spots. I had my big buck knife with me and I was using it to carve another wooden piece. We didn't hear anything and thankfully the night went quiet. I was able to sleep. We were only about 20 feet from the campfire. The thing is around where we camped, and I've heard of Bigfoot and UFO activity, but never paid much attention to it out here. I'm not saying what my wife saw and what we heard was a Bigfoot necessarily, but I firmly believe her that she saw something. The same thing that made that noise. We had a lot of Bigfoot stuff happening on that trip and never saw anything else besides the one encounter. Now sometimes, when I sleep at night, I'll hear that same scream in my dreams come piercing into my head at night. I wake up in cold sweats sometimes. It was really scary and out of this world.
This is a two-part story. The first part details this alien craft, which we saw, and leads us well into part 2, where after that, my family and I were stalked by this strange arachnid-like creature for months. This happened in late September of 2006. Myself and a group of friends and family had gone to New Mexico desert to ride around on four-wheelers and have a good time. At this time, I was 16. We had camped out all weekend and we were ready to go home. It was roughly 10 o'clock in the morning. We all get back to the parking lot area. We had our trucks all lined up, and we're loading up the truck that had all the food and everything we needed. We were basically just getting ready to leave, and the rest of the group was going to be on their own. We had to ride back to Flagstaff. I was sitting in the back of the truck with my cousins, and we're looking up in the morning sky. Then, we noticed a star or orb that wasn't moving. Then, right across from the horizon, there was this really bright white light that was moving back and forth where it was at. It looked like it went down and I couldn't see it anymore. Me and my cousins saw this thing and were all amazed at what it was. We speculated it was a UFO, but we weren't sure. Then, after it had disappeared from sight, all of us, my parents and family included, began hearing this incredibly loud humming noise coming from up above us. It sounded like a plane or something, maybe 400 feet directly above us. Only problem is, when you look up, there's nothing there. All of us were very confused and perplexed by this, and none really knew how to explain away this. Okay, that's weird. Let's just continue with our journey back to Flagstaff. The humming eventually fades away, and we're en route to get back on the way we needed to go. This is right when we end up seeing something straight from the movie Independence Day. It's almost like it instantly appeared. And my way to explain this is that this ship or craft had to have been cloaked. That's the only way I can explain it. We're on a stretch of road that we're the only ones, and that humming mechanical noise comes back. We're looking around to see the source and figuring maybe it's just a plane flying overhead. Well, we're all looking ahead and above, and all we see is this thing at the same time passing over us. It would have been impossible to see this thing just over our car and not anywhere else in the sky. Hence why I say my opinion that it was cloaked. It was this massive black cube, several hundred feet thick and maybe hundreds of feet across. Just a massive cube right over our car. It didn't make any noise except for that loud humming sound that was more static-like than ever. I will tell you this, that thing was not a blimp. It had tons of lights on it, and it was huge. It was very strange, and all of us saw this thing in the truck. We're in total awe, and screaming and yelling at each other in terror and excitement, being like, "Can you believe this? What we're seeing? Is this some sort of government craft?" After a moment or two of hovering, just vanish into thin air. It was the hot topic for easily the next few hours, the rest of the way home, as we had no idea how to possibly explain it away. Anyone who knows about motherships knows that the US government has been watching them for years. They have stuff like this in the US government bases. I will tell you that I'm not crazy neither. So, anyway, we were also all sober. Nobody was under the influence of any drugs or substances or alcohol. And I should mention that this craft stayed there for a few moments, then quickly shot directly vertically up and out of sight. Now, this leads us into the next part of our story. After the whole UFO thing, the energy around our house really began to change. My parents began fighting all the time. My siblings and I fought constantly. It felt as though the peace within our house had been taken. You could just feel there was some sort of shift in the atmosphere. I'm not saying the changes took place immediately, but shortly after this sighting. Then, within a couple of weeks, this strange arachnid creature started trying to break into our house at night. I call it that because, based on its features and the way it behaved, I'm not sure what else I should refer to it as. It was not a person, I'll tell you that much. And it was not a bear or dog or animal that I know of. It could have been some mutant. One night, I was watching TV, thinking about playing some PS2, when I see this thing coming up to the house from the sliding glass door. I see it coming, and I'm like, is that a large dog? Thinking to myself because of how it looked in the dark approaching the house. And then, I see it's actually not a dog, but something else altogether. The way it was moving around on 6+ feet. Let's just say it was kind of like slithering. It had a human body and multiple arms, and long, singular claws that dug into the ground to pull itself along. The head was human, but with 2 eyes, and a mouth full of black, sharp teeth. It looked arachnidy, if that makes sense. It was pretty scary, I'm not gonna lie. Obviously, my reaction in the moment was nothing like how I'm describing it. I'm cool, calm, and collective. But in the moment, I began screaming and ran back towards my room from the living room. Bam! I hear this thing smack against the sliding glass door, and what sounds like trying to break it down or open it with great force. After a few moments, it stops altogether. My parents weren't home this night, just me, and I decided to keep it to myself. Well, the next few nights, I guess the same thing tried to breaking into my parents' room, trying its hardest to pry open the window, but it could not. It scared my sisters and my parents to death, as I guess they got a pretty good look at it. This happened several more times over and over, until finally, after a few months, it just stopped showing up altogether. Then, about a month later, my dad suddenly passed away. Our family was devastated, and I always look back at this scenario and can't help but wonder if what we saw and experienced had anything to do with his passing.